adaptation, mitigation, resilience, sustainability, thriving communities versus sustainable communities, and how resilience of our communities are trying to deal with sustaining themselves and moving forward and thriving in a time of dramatic change. And I'm happy to say that colleagues joining me today are going to provide some wonderful insight. Let me just remind us of what this panel is focused on. So the session will focus on the socioeconomic impacts of climate change on Arctic communities and address issues such as food and environmental security, health, hopefully in all aspects of the health regimes, infrastructure, education, connectivity, response capacity, and cross-border cooperation in areas such as soft or civil security, including search and rescue. A rather tall order to cover all of these subjects. But again, I'm very pleased that we have colleagues here who can help us navigate all of this. Let me introduce each of them to you, and then we will start the conversations. I'm going to ask the panelists to give us their perspectives for a few moments, and then what I will do is likely follow up with a quick question to that individual panelist, and then we have some other questions that I'd like to ask, certainly, but I want to open it to others at the program there today for additional questions. So I'm joined from Moscow, actually, by Jennifer Spence. She is the Executive Secretary, the Arctic Council Sustainable Development Working Group. Jen, thank you for joining us. Then I'm joined then by Aslak Holmberg, Vice President of the Sami Council, and many of you know these colleagues very well. I'm also joined by Anna Sofia Skarvedal, and with a last name like Sfrega, I hope, Anna Sofia, that I've been able to pronounce it fairly closely in terms of your last name. Jolie Simone Hebert, Director of Programs and Territorial Cooperation, Société du Plan Nord, and Nicholas Eklund, the Director of the Arctic Center at Umeå University. So welcome all, thank you for your time. And I will turn the program over to my good friend and colleague, Jennifer Spence. Jen?
Great, thanks so much, Mike. And can I get a virtual thumbs up from you just to make it, all right, we're great, excellent. So thanks so much for the opportunity to be a part of this conversation. We've been, I guess I would say, I'm obviously speaking to you from the Arctic Council perspective. And well, I would say we started work specifically on Arctic resilience, introducing the idea or concept of Arctic resilience sort of in the 2011 kind of timeframe. I would say, as Mike says, we've really kind of been in this space, but using different terminology for some time. I mean, ultimately, the Sustainable Development Group is all about those interconnections between a lot of the different issues and opportunities in the Arctic. So, but I think that the concept of resilience adds an element that is really important to explore a little more, how it changes the way that we have some discussion as well. As I mentioned, we started work specifically on Arctic resilience during the Swedish chairmanship in 2011. And then we moved on and continued that discussion, recognizing the value of looking at resilience by introducing an Arctic Resilience Action Framework that was prepared during the US chairmanship and was released in 2017. Both of these were relatively high-level documents, but they still were sort of looking at what are the activities, what are the actions, what are the areas of focus that we really need. Working group has sort of been tapped with focusing on this area, but recognizing that it's an issue that really touches on the work of all of the working groups of the Arctic Council. So I would, as much as the Sustainable Development Working Group is working in this space, I think it really needs to be in collaboration with our colleagues in the other working groups because of the nature of the issues that we're facing and the topics that we want to explore. So we've done a number of what we call Arctic Resilience Forum sessions, and I'd really sort of say that this has been an opportunity to sort of think about, or create a space for discussions around Arctic resilience. And I'd say that through those, we've kind of evolved, been focused on a number of different things. There's three things I want to focus on here. It's about having an inclusive approach. So we really have been trying in the work that we do to have diverse perspectives and to look at diverse issues, bring in experts and knowledge holders from across the Arctic. So diversity in terms of perspectives, diversity in terms of geography, to really further explore this issue of resilience. I also think that it's important to realize that we want to be specific to the Arctic context. So what are the specific conditions and characteristics of the Arctic? What are the unique opportunities and challenges? And those are the types of conversations that we've been having. And I think through those conversations, the Arctic Resilience Forum, we've really come to this discussion about how really strongly interconnected different issues are. And some of the people that are here today have been part of those conversations. You can't talk about connectivity without talking about water security or food security. You can't talk about ecosystems and animal health without talking about human health. And all of these things are connected. And this is a concept that's really we brought together the community that had been working in this area with us to really sort of say, okay, what are the lessons learned from the resilience forums that we've been able to do? And what are some of the next steps? And we got two key messages from the folks that we were working with. One was that now it was time to sort of, we've been having a lot of conversations, but we needed to shift from the ideas of resilience to action that's driven by the concept of resilience. So we wanted to come up with some concrete activities that we were going to do during the Russian chairmanship of the Arctic Council that really sort of draw on the relevance and demonstrate the relevance of that concept for Arctic communities and peoples, which, you know, is not an easy thing to do. The other thing is that part of doing that would be facilitated by having a particular theme. And so we explored a lot of different options, but the one that the group working on developing this further decided to focus on the impacts of permafrost thaw. So you could say it's about climate change, but ultimately we thought, okay, climate change is an element of that, but let's really ground this things that people, sort of immediate things that people are experiencing. And so that's the theme that we focused on. And then with that, and then I will stop, I promise, we identified three specific activities that we were going to do around this theme and around this idea of from ideas to action. So the first one is a community-led tabletop exercise around a community actually going through the experience of impacts of permafrost thaw. And that activity is actually going to be led by the Arctic Athabascan Council. So we really wanted to make sure that it was community-led. The second piece is building a toolkit for communities on monitoring and indicators of around resilience. So we know there's been lots of work done on resilience and indicators, but what does that mean for communities, and how does all this research and work and discussion about resilience actually translate into something useful for communities? And lastly, we'll have our continuing discussion but also talk about other issues related to resilience. So we think this is a really important frame, and we're looking forward to continuing this work with the community that we've been building. So thanks, Mike.
Thank you, Jennifer, for all of that. You cut out a couple of times, but we certainly got the gist of all of that. Let me just ask you a very quick follow-up. As chairmanships rotate every couple of years, I'm always struck that oftentimes there's continuity between the chairmanships. There are threads that are pulled each and then built upon. Do you see this concept moving from the chairmanship and the work done under the Russian Federation, then moving on to the next 1, 2, or 3 chairmanships? Is this one that will actually sustain itself and be a constant theme to build upon?
Yeah, absolutely. We've already had conversations with the Norwegian head of delegation for SDWG. So they're already starting to think about what sort of twist and flavor they would like to put to this thread of advancing Arctic resilience. So to answer your question, absolutely.
Great, thank you. I have many more questions, but we're going to hold off for a moment or two. Aslat, let me turn the microphone over to you now. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you, Mike. Ja põrpäivipuhkaiden ollaan skuvlailla Asla, 4 Aslat ja Jonas Aila, 4 Aslat. Olen täppä Njörkänis Denuleis. So yeah, hello everyone. My name is Aslak Holmberg, and as was mentioned, I am a vice president of the Sami Council. I am also a salmon fisher, and scholar, politician, but often I bring some examples from my salmon fishing, and I will do that also in this topic. So first I want to say a few words in general about the things that are happening here. So it seems like different is the new normal for us, and we see the changes both in summers, winters, of course, year around. But let's say at summer times we've experienced these past summers. Some years we have extremely high water levels. Other years it's extremely low. Some summers are very hot, while others are cold and wet. And these, of course, have direct impacts for us. They have impacts on how we fish. For example, very warm waters mean that there is more slime in the water, so the nets get dirty faster. But due to climate change related reasons, we've experienced a strong decline in our salmon stocks, and this past summer was the first year in history that there was a complete ban on Atlantic salmon fishing in the Tietnu or Teno-Tana river, which is a border river between Finland and Norway. And this is really quite extreme situation, because the vitality or productivity of our villages or estates, it is based on salmon fishing, while in the more southern areas they estimate the productivity of a house based on the amount of grass that they can grow. But here we don't have farming as a livelihood, so here it's based on salmon fishing. So now that this our key resource has been declining, then it has a really broad impacts on our communities. Of course, we have changes at winter times as well. There is one of the most significant changes is that there is often rain on snow, which makes the grazing of the reindeer much more difficult. They cannot access the food through the layer of ice. But yeah, I wanted to share these few examples. And in our view, or how do we define resilience, is that it is all the actions that we can take to strengthen our livelihoods, our communities, and our cultures, so that they are better prepared for facing the changes that we are experiencing. So I want to quickly note a few projects that we are involved in through Arctic Council that have to do with resilience. So one is done under the conservation of Arctic flora and fauna. It's called the Arctic wetlands ecosystems. And this project aims to focus on human activities that impact the Arctic wetlands ecosystems, and to support communities' capacity in engaging in wetland restoration and stewardship. So it aims simultaneously to enhance the social and ecosystem resilience, and this is done through different work packages, but I don't go to the detail at this point. Another one is a project done under the Arctic Monitoring and Assessment Program called Climate Impacts on Terrestrial Ecosystems. So there the aim is to monitor the impacts on things that are changing at this time, because it often happens that certain things are changing now in one area, but we might see the same changes taking place in other areas on a later date. This is a pilot study at the moment, and it aims to gather a team of Sami reindeer herders and terrestrial or climate researchers that could co-produce a scoping study on impacts of climate change to the reindeer herding and grazing areas. And finally, I want to mention a project called the Salmon Peoples of Arctic. That project aims to design an assessment on freshwater river systems based on indigenous knowledge. And one of the goals is to outline future data needs that could contribute to resilience and adaptation. And this is a trend that can be seen throughout the Arctic with salmon stocks fluctuating and in many cases declining strongly. So we've had one workshop in this project, and there has been some unfortunate delay, but the aim is to continue with two other workshops and to gather information from all available sources that would benefit the communities themselves, and to establish this assessment based on indigenous knowledge, and not only that the indigenous knowledge would be a contributing factor, but that it would be looking into the needs of the communities and then defining the assessment based on this. And one of the rivers in the project is the River, where I come from, and the others are Yukon and Kuskokwim River and then Kamchatka River. So we're hoping that this project will start moving ahead after a bit of a break. But yeah, these were some things I wanted to say in the beginning. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. What an outstanding project to further explore, to undertake, and then further explore. And maybe when we come back, also we can talk a little bit more about that. But my question for you is connected to some of the things you mentioned. So let me ask you this, and you didn't specifically talk about this, but we talked about cross-border issues here a lot. I'm wondering, how does the status of indigenous land rights in Finland, Norway, and Sweden affect resilience in Sami communities, right? Because even the project you just talked about, they're managing the land, but also there are land rights overlapping a lot of the things you just talked about. And I'm wondering if you could just give us a little peek, a little insight into that particular dynamic.
Yes, thank you for an excellent question. And yeah, there would be a lot to say on that topic, but perhaps to try to keep it on a general level, as we are talking about Sami who live in 4 countries, and going into details would be quite time consuming. So generally in the Sami tenure systems, the vastness of the areas is considered as some kind of insurance, because if one area loses its productivity, for example, if the grazing lands are frozen due to rain and snow events, then it's key that there are other areas that might not have experienced a similar kind of weather. So this brings us to the question of land rights, and throughout the Sami territories there are a lot of competing forms of land use. Some of the most recent examples that have been taking big areas are wind power parks. There are the biggest inland or mainland wind power plants are in Sami territories. And this means that the reindeer herders are losing these grazing areas, and through that they're losing this flexibility and what I called as the insurance system that they have. So they don't have the chance of moving to another area. So yeah, I'm not sure how much into detail should I go. Perhaps that is enough of an example for now. But yeah, thank you for the question.
Well, thank you for allowing me to ask you that very complex question and then putting the added pressure on you to do it in a very short period of time. So thank you for that. But maybe we can come back around and talk a little bit more about it. And it's fascinating to think about insurance in terms of landscape insurance, the very environment providing an insurance policy, yet that insurance policy is changing dramatically. So maybe we'll come back to that as well, because I think the insight would be really important. Thank you very much. Anna Sophia, let me turn over the spotlight to you, please.
Thank you very much. I would like to talk about Arctic resilience and the importance of knowledge sharing, and with a specific focus on Greenland respectively. To set the big picture, the changing climate and scientists undoubtedly link it to the Greenlandic ice sheet, which is on everybody's minds these days. The melting ice sheet has become a worldwide symbol of climate change, and it is in Arctic Greenland that crucial scientific knowledge is conducted, knowledge that can lead to tomorrow's solutions. And the past few months, scientists in this year's IPCC report, their message echoes around the globe, and their findings are endorsed by governments around the world and also here in Greenland. And I would like to quote one of Greenland's most prominent researchers, Mine Grosing, who says that the Arctic is not changing. The Arctic, as we know it, is actually disappearing. And I think that is a very thought-provoking statement. And of course, the changes happen a lot faster than we expected. And I think whether we're talking about, the thawing permafrost, shift in snow distribution, energy shortages, shortages of food and water, damaged infrastructure, increasing losses to the industry, etc., we can come some way ahead of these challenges with knowledge and answers from science. And however, much scientific knowledge is never absorbed into society or the respective communities as such. And that is, of course, problematic when you talk about Arctic resilience. That is also one of the reasons why the governments of Denmark and Greenland has decided to finance the International Arctic Hub, where I'm situated in Nuuk. It's locally anchored here in Greenland, and we concentrate on building bridges between science and community. I would say that so far our experience and dialogue with Arctic research stakeholders, the scientists, the people in the local communities here, representatives from the business and industry and education sector, government officials, show that knowledge transfer is often a one-way street. And both sides agree that more knowledge can help us navigate confidently within and adapt to this rapidly changing environment. But first, we must be better at applying knowledge and data and results from science within society, and also find solutions to the question posed by local communities in the Arctic. If we look at how Arctic communities can benefit from research, there was this big area of ice as big as Sweden and Norway combined melted from the Greenland ice sheet, and researchers worldwide visit Greenland to study these extreme weather conditions and socioeconomic effects. And meanwhile, we have the politicians struggling to navigate in this ocean of information, and also the locals trying to adapt to new realities, like Aslan talked about, the wind power plants in the reindeer herding areas. So we're all trying to adapt to these new realities, and we are all really strongly depending on each other to adapt. But we think that more knowledge of what is happening and the impacts that we can expect the climate changes have on our lives will enable us to anticipate better, prepare for and respond to these hazardous events, trends, or disturbances that are related to climate. And at the Arctic Hub, we're trying to prevent specifically what we call the fly-in, fly-out conditions, where many researchers come to Greenland to conduct various research, collect data, and discover ways to approach various topics and solutions. But they often have so little time, and many are perhaps uncertain on how to approach issues, for example, as a local community engagement. So the knowledge is never really locally anchored here in Greenland. At the same time, we have coming to Greenland that is not easy. Obviously, it's very difficult due to weather and infrastructure and logistics. It's difficult and expensive. But it is nonetheless essential that researchers become more aware of the benefits of engaging and establishing valuable partnerships with people in the Arctic, local communities in this process. So just to sum up, the Arctic is undergoing rapid and dramatic changes. We all know that. And building resilience is an urgent need across the region. It's something that we can feel up close. But we also believe that resilience can be cultivated and strengthened by understanding the key components of resilience and the extent to which they are present in a local context. We can target activities and knowledge sharing to enhance these components and fill some of the gaps. This could be, for example, a community looking to adapt to climate change, who can benefit from the newest scientific knowledge about tourism development in remote areas, or it could be new satellite observation forms that help fishermen navigate at sea or improve local search and rescue mission. And if we draw lines back to Greenland, this grand big island has become the symbol of climate change, but we believe that Greenland is not just a symbol or a victim of climate change. We also want to be part of the solution. And we really think that local anchorage of knowledge and the sharing of knowledge is key to building resilience and hence sustainable development of the Arctic. Thank you.
Thank you. As with our other colleagues, I have many questions, but I'm only going to ask one or two, and then maybe we can follow up on these others. So I'd like to ask, perhaps most interesting to me has been, is the way in which outside from Greenland, research community has engaged with Greenland, and providing an Arctic hub is one way of providing, a more structured, more integrated, more equal kind of way of exploring what's happening in an area that is really emblematic of the new North, as you noted. I wonder what has been the reception of researchers to the concept of the Arctic hub, the underlying commitment that knowledge is shared, and then perhaps what is the follow-up? Is there, when someone then leaves with the data, do they report back? Do they actually engage with the Arctic hub and with the communities in a timely fashion, realizing that this is new? But that is an expectation, right?
Mm-hmm. Well, it's our experience. Now we've had the chance for the past year when the Secretariat was established to really engage and talk to and drink coffee with lots of the Arctic research stakeholders. And it's our impression that people have a will, or they are willing to share the knowledge. They're just uncertain on how to do so. That could be a very reason. For example, as I mentioned, it's an issue of time. When traveling here in Greenland, you may have weather and infrastructure and logistics that makes it difficult to travel to, even the furthest distance remote communities. And then there's also the aspect of knowledge of the local context, what works here in Greenland. And we try to guide or help international researchers coming to Greenland in navigating in these ways of communications and learning about the local context here in Greenland, which is very different because the country is so wide, the distances are so far. So the local context can be very different. But from our experiences, the requests that we get here at the Arctic Hub, or when people call us or email us, they all have this desire to be connected across different fields of expertise, across different areas. I think that relates very well to what Jennifer said about the interconnectivity, and that all areas are somewhat interrelated. And that's the same way with people working in different areas. There is this need to work together across the different segments, across different countries, different fields of expertise. And we try to help promote or build these bridges that are needed to, facilitate this dialogue across the different stakeholders and so forth.
Thank you. Let me now, that was very good, very good. I gave you a lot in that question to cover, so thank you for covering all of that very quickly. Jolie Simon, are you on? I cannot see you on my screen. Yes, perfect, wonderful. Let me turn over the virtual floor to you.
Thank you. So can you hear me well? Yes, good. So good day to all. Thank you for inviting my organization, the Société du Plan Nord, Quebec Government Corporation, to participate today. So I'm gonna use a very short presentation. It's a down-to-earth initiatives of Quebec, which can illustrate that resilience passes through opening the horizons of possibilities. So I'm gonna share my screen. So do you see the presentation?
We can see it, but it's not in the full view.
Okay. So then.
Perfect.
Good. So our mission is in a sustainable perspective to contribute to the integrated and current developments of Quebec's Northern Territory in keeping with the government's orientation and in collaboration with regional and local representative and private sector. Our territory of application is the north of the 49th parallel, which represents 72% of the province. You can see on the map the area north of the 49 in deep blue. The main objective behind all action of our young organization, which was created in 2015, is to establish winning conditions to enable residents to fully inhabit their northern territory. 5 guiding principles were taken in order to achieve this objective. This is to say, initiatives to respond to the territory's priorities adapted to conditions in northern latitude, cooperation with local and aboriginal communities, leverage effect that pulls the partners' efforts, concrete structuring action, and tangible measurable outcomes, synergy between the 3 dimensions of sustainable development. According to climate change projection, by 2080, the growing seasons will increase as will the frost-free period in the northern region of Quebec, allowing the increased forage yields and new agricultural potential. However, today, less than 1% of the agricultural territory is located north of the 49th parallel. You can see on the map in green, agricultural zones concentrated mostly along the southern part of the St. Lawrence River. Taking into account these considerations, Société du Plan Nord aims to the development and implementation of a sustainable Nordic biofood model by focusing on the territory's potential. So among others programs that can support biofood development, we articulate the Community Greenhouse Development Program in 2017. The program targets the construction of community greenhouses that promote and enhance health and well-being of local population by generating the following benefits: community-based economy, better supply of fresh, nutritious local products, local and regional expertise and workforce. Between 2017 and 2020, the program helps to develop knowledge and best community-based concept by financing studies and consultation process, along with some constructions, including a pilot project in Kuujjuaq within a dry hydroponic container. In 2020, these studies that were shared among all interested communities motivated the continuation and enhancement of the program in order to raise community greenhouse projects that can significantly contribute to food security. Well, 12 new greenhouses were built since 2017, all of them under the leadership and management of northern communities. So here I share with you some example in pictures. You can see the container, the hydroponic container in Kuujjuaq, which is north of the 60th parallel, and some other types of greenhouses and tunnels that we help to construct among the 5 last years.
Thank you for that. I have, again, a number of questions. I'll only ask one or two, and then hopefully we'll have some time left that I can add a couple more perhaps. But I would ask our colleagues there at the symposium to be thinking about questions that you may like to ask our panelists as well. And we'll certainly try to fit those in. We have about, I believe, unless the symposium leaders can tell me, about a half hour left or so to this panel. But back to this particular presentation, I have 2 questions. In a former life, I worked for a School of Natural Resources and Agricultural Sciences, so I have many questions along these lines. But 2 in particular. One would be the expertise from outside of the community. I do want to get to the expertise within the community, but the expertise outside of the community. Where did that come from? Did it come from the region of Quebec, or did it come from outside of other areas of Canada or elsewhere? That's one. 2 is, in the North, we're always challenged for energy. Where does the energy come from? Is it solar? Is it diesel? Is it a combination? Those are just 2 quick questions, if you wouldn't mind addressing those. And I'm sorry that there's a lot more to those questions than I am being fair with you on.
A result that is really interesting from this program is that each project were very, they share common grounds, but also the communities wanted to make the project their own realization. So they are different. We have some greenhouse that are using solar energy, and others that it's a combination between diesel and solar. And also for some sector between the 49 and the 55 parallel, there are some zone where there's hydroelectricity as well. So this is used. And we have also a project that use biomass energy. So it is joined with another industry that were already existed, linked with the forestry activity. And as for your first question, expertise. So within the Quebec government, of course, we have a Ministry of Agriculture, and these people own a very large expertise, but work mostly in the southern part of Quebec. So we bring these people to work with northern communities, and so we are doing the link between expertise within the Quebec government and the needs in the northern part of Quebec. Also, we work a lot with researchers. It can be from a collegial level or university or private institute in order to introduce them to the reality of northern communities. And also within our program, we accept some expenses linked with research and development and workforce training. So that is something that we added in 2020 because we want these greenhouses to be managed and to be sustainable by local communities. So a way to achieve this objective is to train people and to develop expertise locally.
Thank you very much for that. Nicholas, let me turn over the virtual presentation to you, sir.
Okay, as we will keep saying in this day and age, can you hear me okay? All right, thank you very much. Thanks for the invite. My name is Niklas Eklund. I'm the director of the Arctic Center at Umeå University. And for those of you who are unfamiliar with the geography of northern Sweden, this is right on the coastline of the Baltic Sea, actually the Gulf of Bothnia, and it's the second to northest county of Sweden. We have a lovely winter's day. It's getting dark outside. It has been dark for quite some time. We are more or less in the Arctic. I want to share a couple of thoughts with you, perhaps shifting the perspective on resilience a little bit more towards security aspects. I have three observations I want to make eventually. One is on imagery and the meaning of imagery and attitudes when it comes to things Arctic. The second thing I want to talk to you about is transboundary processes and the vital importance of transboundary processes, transgressing boundaries in order to create opportunities, but also things that we have to be a little bit watchful for when we think about where things are headed and where we want them to be heading in the Arctic setting. And the third observation I want to make is about political linkages, the way the Arctic is connected with the rest of the world in political terms. For those of you wondering then, why would he even mention politics in this. I am also a professor of political science, so hence my perspective, if you like. But I wanted to start out by saying that, you know, in my work, I try to connect researchers from different disciplines. We are a multidisciplinary arena, the Arctic Center is. And it's interesting, one of the things that I would like to observe at the very outset is that, you know, in my everyday work, I will say that science is the answer. But more and more after being the director here for a while and trying to achieve multidisciplinary approaches and so on and so forth on things Arctic, I'm beginning to ask myself, what is the question? You know, if science is the answer, what is the question? And I think this ties in with some of the policy changes, current policy changes taking place in Europe and in other parts of the world, where I believe what was Jennifer Spence who mentioned at the outset, you know, in 2011, by the Swedish chairmanship of the Arctic Council, for instance, there was this upsurge of interest in things Arctic. And the whole discussion at that point in time, you know, 10, 12 years ago, was about the Arctic as a whole, a holistic perspective, including different inroads into creating better knowledge about the Arctic. Now, if you look at the policy development, both on the EU level, I would say the same for Sweden and some other countries in Europe as well. Currently, if you look at the policy development since, the debate, I think, has shifted more towards talking about polar issues and polar research. And so my first observation really by you know, entering the topic, I would say that I think people in my position saying science is the answer, we're asking ourselves, what is the question, more and more, because whereas the term Arctic and an interest in Arctic affairs and things Arctic is a more inclusive term, polar research seems to be on the rise. And for me, working in a multidisciplinary setting, that means basically that the natural sciences are on the rise, technological sciences are on the rise, and the Arctic, if you like, then in the polar perspective becomes a remote area to be studied from the outside. Whereas the perspective I would like to return to, and I think, you know, if science is supposed to give good answers about things Arctic, I think we need to return to the perspective of 2011. I think we need to get back to talking about the Arctic in an inclusive perspective, also in scientific terms, which means studying communities, cultures, cultural dilemmas, processes, and whatnot. You get the economy in between there somehow. So that would be my first observation, my sort of opening, just to say that things have changed. Doing Arctic science today is not exactly what it was 10 years ago. And I would welcome a discussion on where this policy development is taking us, because it's from my perspective, at least, not taking us in the right direction currently. But then I wanted to make three observations then to do with security, which is something that we're gradually trying to become better at analyzing at my home university here. And the first one then is to do with imagery and attitudes. It's nothing revolutionary in that. When I make presentations about the Arctic and Arctic research in the widest possible sense, I always start with the same image. You know, you Google up Arctic and you will find images of polar bears. Now, the worst part is, you know, these images tend to stick. I think it was in another session, somebody asked, you know, why would young people from other parts of the world move to the north? Well, part of the problem, I think, is the images that stick. And even if I look in the local paper from this morning, from the Umeå area, there was a story on a lady who was walking out her dog. She was out walking her dog peacefully. Then she let her dog loose, and then she was attacked by a moose. She was tackled to the ground by a moose. Interestingly, you know, that image, if I tell my colleagues in other parts of the world about that, they're basically going to say, well, you're crazy to be living up there in the first place. So, you know, old ladies get tackled by moose in a park in the city. It's hard to talk about the modern northern, the modern European North. And it's also hard a lot of the time to actually get images of the modern European North that will stick with people in other parts of the world. But if you look in terms of electronic connectivity, if you look at my university, 35,000 students, from even international students from all over the world and so on and so forth, we're talking about a very particular part of the Arctic that's actually both connected with and a part of, if I may use that simplistic expression, the developed part of the world. You know, so we're a part of Europe, we're a part of the world, and so on and so forth. And the same can be said for other inhabited areas of the Arctic. Hence also the need for an inclusive perspective on the Arctic, and not a, I would say, polar perspective. Okay, my second point was about transboundary processes, and I can make this short and sweet, I think. I sincerely hope, and this is actually an issue of security as well, that the climate issue will not become a new COVID-19 issue. Because one of the things that we've learned from the COVID experience is that for all the intent and purposes of the Nordic countries, and the Nordic countries, we all know in the north of Europe that, you know, we're stronger together, we need to stick together, we are connected in terms of transportation, and we need each other and all that, energy supply, what have you. But the COVID just put an end to that. And all of a sudden, you follow discussions on the internet, particularly among the younger people, lambasting each other on the basis of their nationality. And I haven't even mentioned, you know, what happens between dominant cultures and indigenous cultures and that thing going on. So hopefully, the green industrialization taking place in the north of Sweden right now will somehow be connected with what goes on in northern Finland and in northern Norway. And hopefully, even if we, you know, there are opportunities to actually go green and still have development, still have positive economic and social development, even in Arctic parts of the world. Can we please look at that? Can we please discuss that together and stay together in trying to develop, you know, a better place to be, actually? Because if we don't, on our own, we won't succeed. We're not big enough. Third observation, then again, like I said, political linkages. The Arctic, or circumpolar Arctic, you should say, has what, 4 million inhabitants. It's like a small European country almost, if you count all of them. Roughly half of those live in Russia. What happens in the Arctic, the old saying, I guess, is what happens in the Arctic doesn't stay in the Arctic. What goes to the Arctic also doesn't stay in the Arctic. Linkages when it comes to politics and security in the Arctic are very, very sensitive. I don't know how many of you out there actually believe that we can talk about a continued positive development in the Arctic if things turn south, go south in Ukraine. You always have to look at the Arctic in geopolitical terms from a global perspective. We have to remember what big and small countries are involved in the Arctic setting. And we have to be very, very careful when we talk about the geopolitical interests of those very different countries. And the same can be said inside countries. We have major differences between different parts of countries, between localities, settings, cultures, and whatnot. So it's a mishmash of very, very highly sensitive structures, if you like. And if we're not careful, if we're not very democratic and very pluralistic in discussing these issues, we will be prey to any kind of hybrid warfare that a bad person is even possible to think of. Now, my last point would be, actually, I think you're probably, so, you know, what I'm saying basically is let's join hands and understand the localities and regionalities of the Arctic in the widest possible sense. But I think you're probably all wondering what happened to the little old lady, right? The woman who was tackled by moose as her dog was running around in the park. She was taken to hospital, but she was released immediately afterwards, and she told the journalist basically, well, you know, these things happen. When you let your dog loose, it's nothing. And then she went home. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm glad there was a pseudo happy ending to that story. Several of us have witnessed similar instances. I'm sure all of us in the room have stories like that. I'm glad it turned out well. Nicholas, you hit on one particular issue, well, many issues that I wish we had just symposiums on each of your interventions, but I want to turn it to the symposium leadership to solicit some questions from our audience. But I do have one question / comment, perhaps a quick reaction from you. A lot of what you noted here has to do with how we communicate, how we in the North communicate our place, how we control the dialogue, the discussion points, how we describe our North. It's not this mythical, untouched place somewhere off a map somewhere that's totally disconnected, or it's not just a polar bear or an iceberg or something like that, right? This is a full complement of societal issues, just like others have in the rest of the world, but somehow dominant narratives do rather dictate the newspapers, the headlines, all of those things. So my question / comment to you is, do you agree with that it's really incumbent upon us to maybe take a little bit more control about how we collectively communicate the Arctic writ large, and then the Arctic regionally in terms of our connections and where we sit in the Arctic? Would that be accurate?
Absolutely. No, I would agree with that. And I think it even goes deeper than that. It goes into how we construct our democratic dialogues, even within our own countries. I don't know how, I'm not quite familiar with a lot of other countries, but if you look at Scandinavia, for instance, Sweden and Norway, certainly you will have these old ancient ideas about what people from the north are like, and people from the south being the intelligent, fast talking ones, people from the north being slow and stupid, and so on and so forth. And sometimes you don't have to be a political scientist actually to see a lot of the time this enters into, it's very insidious, but it enters into the overall democratic debate on development inside a country even. So what we need to do, I think, and particularly not to be too vulnerable then for outsider wanting to exacerbate these potential conflicts, if you like, but not just just brush them off, but actually take them seriously. And is this really what we want to do? Is this really what we want to say? And interestingly, if you take Sweden as a case currently, the whole notion that the north delivers electric energy and then the south uses it up, that's all being turned on its head, because the industrial development in the north is so heavy right now that we're gonna have to be self-sufficient in the north, and the south is basically asking what the hell, where are we going to get our electricity? So it's we need to take that change seriously and kind of leave the 1800s behind somehow. And this is just talking about Sweden. I'm sure a lot of you will recognize the same thing going on in other countries. And if you add the indigenous aspect to that, it gets worse, even worse. So
okay, thank you for that. There are many symposium in each of your presentations. We could do 2 or 3 days on each of our colleagues' comments here today. Perhaps many of us can take on some of those symposium ideas in the future. But we do have a couple of questions from the audience. One from our good friend Turkel, and I think there's one others. But let me leave it to the leadership in the room there in Brussels to at least present the first question or the first person who would like to ask a question of this panel. We have about 15 minutes left.
I'm not Turkel, sorry.
Okay.
No, hello, my name is Miguel Roncero. I work in DG MAR in the European Commission. I work on Arctic topics. I have a question for Niklas. I would like to know your opinion, whether basically, Arctic exceptionalism as a notion that, as a political science, you know, but it's idea for those who don't know that, things in the Arctic don't need to be affected by, things happening in the rest of the world. So, Niklas, I would like to know your opinion whether Arctic exceptionalism is a reality or is a necessity. Thank you.
There, I'm unmuted, right? I guess what I was trying to say basically was that I don't think exceptionalism is a good idea from where I sit and where I work. I think it's interesting just to know, or just to remind ourselves, that if we look at the European North, and even including Russia, the Russian European North, we're talking about a heavily populated, over-industrialized and so on and so forth, connected part of Europe. Now, if we only talk about the Scandinavian countries, barring Norway, then we also talk about an area in which the EU legislates. It's a part of the EU even. So So if you go the route of talking of Arctic exceptionalism, that will also sort of bring you towards saying, well, the European North probably isn't really a part of the Arctic. It should be more polar, and then we're out in the sea, and maybe we will talk about the very tip of the North, perhaps, but then it's the huge uninhabited lands of North America and Siberia and so on. That's the real Arctic, and that I find problematic. I think we should actually talk about the Arctic as, first of all, from a more holistic perspective. We need to bring more types of science in to do with culture and peoples and development and whatnot. But we also should talk about it as part of the world we live in a sense. So exceptionalism worries me to a large extent. But I hope that addresses your question. That's just my perspective, is trying to build initiatives, research initiatives on a sort of wider basis than just looking at trees or what you can drill from the ice and so on and so forth, but actually bring social aspects and historical aspects into the picture. Then people have lived in and utilized the Arctic for hundreds of years. I think we should talk about it as part of the world we live in, as opposed to making it exotic or distant.
A really good answer. This issue about Arctic exceptionalism comes up over and over and over again as we all collectively think through what does that mean and how do we navigate this, and is there an exceptionalism, especially when issues outside of the Arctic are now impacting the geopolitics of the Arctic and vice versa. So let me turn back to our colleagues there at the symposium to see if I think there's one or two other questions, and I want to make sure we fit those in.
Mike, this is Turkel. Thank you very much. And also thank you very much for Miguel for the question. But I would like to return to our interlocutor from Quebec, if she's still with us. I thought that this idea of, I'll move so you can actually turn the camera on to see.
Okay, thank you.
Great, anyway. So
we're working on it, Turkel. There you are, we have you now.
There I am, great. Anyway, I'll sit like this because you have online audiences. So my question to the very interesting presentation from Quebec was, could that be turned into a franchise so that you actually set up a system where you have containers with energy sources, water sources, and the whole precision agriculture? And then could you possibly imagine that you would work inside Canada? We had in the former panel a lady called Carpenter, Alyssa, who was sitting in Whitehorse. And I think there are many other hamlets across Alaska, northern Canada, possibly even Greenland, who might benefit from this perspective of fresh produce. And I can't help getting the idea that there are some precision agricultural projects in the Netherlands who might be able to help you. They have droplets of water coming in precisely when the tomato needs it, rather than throwing water in liters over a plant or something like that. And then I wanted to thank you, Mike Frager, for picking up the difficult panel here. It's spanning quite a lot of issues. But thank you very much for moderating.
Yes, so thank you for the question. In fact, our first objective is to raise interest and confidence among local communities in the north of Quebec. So it's not, the first objective is not to produce, so the first objective is not to produce food commercially, okay? But is to well work with the people to have this capacity building, and then in a second time to be able to reach that food security, but from the local force. So this is the way we work the program right now. But yes, the objective, I would say, maybe in the second time, would be to develop bigger and more technical greenhouses in the northern part of Quebec. But we want to start small, I would say, to make it work, because it has to come from local communities to be able to have the feeling that it's really improve quality of health and develop the proximity economy and this sustainable economy in the north. So I don't know if I will answer your question, sir.
Turko, let me ask you virtually here. Did that address the question?
Yes, thank you.
Okay.
I think if I could just follow up on that, I think you're sitting on a gold mine here for local Arctic communities. I just see a McVeggie container energy hub technology, and I can't help provoking you by asking you, would you consider sharing this technology with somebody in Whitehorse in the Yukon district?
Yes, all studies that we did finance through this program are available to share with other countries and interested parties. Yes, and at the same time, yes, we tested some ideas through these studies and this program, but we still need expertise and help from other countries, like in Europe, where we know that you are far ahead in developing greenhouses and produce fruits and vegetables in the north.
Thank you. Let me ask our colleagues at the symposium if there are other questions from the audience before I think we have about 6 minutes left or so.
Yep, we have one more question coming up.
Okay, wonderful.
Can you hear me?
We can.
Yes? Yes. Okay. My name is Juliana Wilczynski. I'm an American intern at NATO, but I'm just here on a personal level of interest at the conference. I have a question for the Sami representative, Mr. Auslaut. I don't know how to pronounce it, I'm sorry. As Nicholas touched upon the issue of Arctic security, which is an issue which is bringing a lot of awareness and interest to the Arctic region. Discussions on Arctic security are challenging because they so often are centered around the nation-state perspective and sovereignty issues. And I'm just curious if you could comment at all on what the role of Indigenous peoples could be and inclusion of their traditional knowledge in the changing paradigm of Arctic security. Thank you.
Yeah, I guess I'll have to thank you for the question, even though I was not at all prepared for the security perspective. So I guess I'm just gonna have to improvise by starting to think out aloud with the fact that like the Sami, we are a cross-border indigenous people. So our territory goes from NATO members like Norway to the Russian Federation in the Kola Peninsula, to the territory of the European Union on the other hand. So there is a lot of different pieces of the puzzle that you have to balance when when discussing issues like security. So I'm not sure how concrete level perspectives I can give on specifically on security, but generally thinking, our approach historically has been a peaceful one, and such as the earliest conventions written between the states in the Sami areas, they were acknowledging the role of Sami as a cross-border people. So, for example, in the Lappe Codicil signed between what was then Denmark and Sweden, then Sami were given the right to not be part of the militaries of the countries, because it could have meant that we have to fight between each other, between family members. So I think this is the most concrete perspective that I can share at the moment, that we are by definition a cross-border people, and I think it goes with a lot of the Arctic communities, that even if the state borders exist and the communities are very, very tight. So yeah, that was as close as I can get to answering your question. Thank you.
Thank you both. We have 2 or 3 minutes left, but I've been given special dispensation that we can go 1 or 2 over if need be. Let me add just 2 follow-up questions. Jennifer, let me put you on the spot for a moment. And then Anna Sophia, I'm going to put you on the spot as well. So I want to just give you a heads up. Related to Turkel's question about, the greenhouses and almost a package where you have energy, you have the greenhouse construction material, you have the whole concept wrapped and shipped in the north, or at least it's a framework for adding to food supplies, food security, locally grown. I wonder if that has come up in some of your discussions in your particular team, and if they have, it would be great to get some insight on that particular issue.
So I get to go first?
Yes.
Okay. So yeah, I mean, I think there's a dynamic at play here. I mean, the SCWG has done a lot of work with communities, and a lot of the work that we try to do is recognizing that these solutions have to be context specific. And even with the tabletop exercise we're going to do on impacts of permafrost thaw, we're very conscious of the fact that we're going to do it with one community in one context, and some of that's going to be transferable and some of it's not. So how do you pull out the pieces that can be transferable, that the community should be sharing from one community to the other, or bringing in from outside the north, or transporting from the north somewhere else for that matter? How do we take those nuggets and carry them somewhere else, but also respect and create flexibility to recognize those elements that really are context specific? I mean, we have a lot of examples where we do a lot of work related to energy and energy security. We know that the Arctic context, there are a lot of factors in a lot of Arctic contexts. They're not like whether it's solar panels or batteries, and the types of things that and the maintenance and capacity around developing and maintaining those things should not be underestimated. So this is certainly not a one size fits all, but I would not suggest that doesn't mean there isn't transferability, but it is about pulling out those pieces and recognizing that it's context specific.
Yeah, thank you for letting me put you on the spot. Thanks for the answer. Anna Sophia, I want to put you on the spot now, and this will be the last thing, and then we'll let the symposium go on to the next panel. But I think it was Eric who mentioned, or Nicholas, I'm sorry, Nicholas, that mentioned COVID and some issues related to that. I'm wondering, if we had just telecommunications in particular as an example, but this is not the question. if we were all asked about connectivity in the North, communications in the North, pre-pandemic, we all would have said we're challenged. We need reliable, redundant, affordable telecommunications across the North for all of our communities. And then COVID came, and so that wasn't just a spotlight, that was mostly a heat lamp on an issue. It amplified just how reliant we are on, in this case, telecommunications, and how little we had in terms of reliable, redundant, affordable telecommunications. So COVID had an impact. I'm wondering, from your perspective in Greenland, what were some of the things that you learned, unfortunately, as a result of COVID, in terms of just now outside of the Arctic Hub, but in terms of the COVID issue? We all had a challenge here. I'm wondering if you can give us one or two insights about how that impacted Greenland and the work that you're trying to do or others are trying to do, or just our own community's ability to be resilient in a time of incredible change like this.
I think during COVID, when it started, we became aware in Greenland specifically how fragile we are, how distant we are from the world, but also how much we can do if we collaborate together across entities. We had the Arctic Joint Command, the Natural Institute of Resources working together on just getting vaccines from A to B in some of the most remote locations, and we had to have freezers on board of vessels to transport the vaccines, for example. And there is a very limited capacity in the healthcare sector in Greenland, so we very much dependent on healthcare workers coming from the outside as well. So that's some of the issues that we learned. That said, you talked about telecommunications. We just had power outages last week where we were all disconnected from the rest of the world, and that made us think of how fragile we are if that breaks down as well. Just one kind of cable that was destroyed that they had to repair, and telecommunications were out for 18 hours, which is fairly long to be without being able to call each other, do email tasks, etc. So, but I think that said, we're very fortunate to be connected to the rest of the world, and I think also the COVID situation has brought that into perspective as well. I'm sitting here like 4,000 or something kilometers away, participating at a conference in Brussels. So I think we are also aware that we can do much more than we used to, and we should really take on the possibilities and opportunities that have revealed itself during COVID as well.
Thank you for letting me put you on the spot on that question as well. Well, look, thank you, colleagues on this panel, it was fantastic. As Turkel said, we had depth and breadth, lots of issues. Full symposiums could be placed on any one of these issues. My thanks again to the leadership at the Polar Foundation there, and to Joseph Cheek and his team for all of the work that went into this two-day agenda. And I'll just turn it back to you. And colleagues, thank you very much for a very informative and engaging discussion. I'll turn it now back to our colleagues at the symposium.
Thank you very much, Mike, and thanks to all the panelists for this rather complete overview of resilience and the real-life examples of how climate change affects life and industry, and evenly interesting the examples of the fisheries and the greenhouse projects in Quebec. And if this symposium might lead to some exchange, some kind of platform becomes a platform of exchange between different people, we'll be more than happy to facilitate the exchange of contacts for those who want to do so, of course. I also remember the importance of knowledge sharing, and then also what Niklas mentioned, how important it might be to get rid of some, let's call it restrictive perceptions. We remember the example of the lady and the moose. We're all happy, of course, that she's doing fine, but it's not necessarily, you want maybe to have a more holistic perception of the region. So thank everyone for these examples and the debate.